Solomon is saying, enjoy God. He got the answers he wanted. He didn't get the results he wanted. And what did Solomon tell us to do in the book of Proverbs? Search for wisdom. And as good as it is, it's incapable of effecting real change. Failure has often been explained as climbing the ladder of success only to find that the ladder was leaning against the wrong wall. People are looking for happiness. Is there anything wrong with that? No. Nothing wrong with this, but it can be misguided. It can be a misguided pursuit if we're not careful. The pursuit for happiness and satisfaction is a dangerous path. That path is crowded with broken down lives and shattered hopes of people who took a wrong turn. And that's exactly what Solomon is running his experiment. That's what he's doing. He is running this experiment. What will make men happy? What will make mankind happy, not just men? You see the passage where he says, I looked to see what God had given for man to do under the sun. He says earlier in chapter 1 in our text tonight that it is an unhappy business that God has given us to deal with. So he's saying God has given us an unhappy, a level of unhappiness to deal with in a fallen world. And so he says, well, what could make man happy in life? What can help us enjoy life? And so he begins his experiment. In the first 11 verses of the first chapter of Ecclesiastes, Solomon introduces us to the cold, hard realities of living in a fallen world. He announced that he intended to use his power and privilege to run an experiment on our behalf, not just for himself. He tells us that he is embarking on a search for what good can be found in this life under the sun, and what, if anything, can bring happiness to our lives. So today we'll witness Solomon's personal testimony concerning the search. He goes through the basic pursuits that all humanity looks to for happiness. And we're going to look at that tonight. Now, he will expound these more as we go, but he really does give us the core of the book, really, right here in this section tonight, chapter 1, verse 12, all the way to chapter 2, verse 26. So the first thing is that he says there's a fruitless pursuit of knowledge. You see that in verse 12 through 18. He says, I, the preacher, have been king over Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. And it is unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after the wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me. And my heart has great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to knowledge, to know wisdom, and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this is also but striving or grasping after the wind. You can feel the wind. You can see the effects of the wind. But you can't hold it, can you? And he says, this is sort of what I'm experienced. So the first thing that he says is, and this is Solomon, what did he pray for? You know, God says, I'll give you what you want. And Solomon said, I need wisdom to lead this great people, for I am but a young man. And God says, because you did not ask for riches, I will give you both wisdom and riches. And so you can see that at the top of Solomon's list is this pursuit of knowledge. But now I want to point out a couple of things to us here that we might need to make a few distinctions. One is that this is one of the very few places in the Bible where the word wisdom should be interpreted as learning or knowledge. Solomon says he pursued more and more knowledge through research, books, and contemplation. At one point he says, and the making of books, there is no end. And Mike said, amen. Mike said, and unloading the pastor's books, there is no end. And I have more now. But now by that, he's not saying there's anything wrong with research. There's nothing wrong with wisdom. There's nothing wrong with learning, knowledge, or any of that. But what he is saying, when he says, I used wisdom, in verse 18, he goes on and says, knowledge. So the idea here is that essentially, Solomon says, I sought happiness through acquiring great learning. We might even say education, but not in the way you and I would think of it. You know, in ancient times, this would be reading of ancient texts, visiting wise teachers and places where you could learn from different teachers, having teachers come to you. So it's much more personal. And acquiring these ancient texts. There were ancient libraries you could travel to and access documents and so forth. So that's what he's talking about. And he's saying, I did all that. I acquired more knowledge than anyone who ruled in Israel before me. And the truth is, it's all like grasping for the wind. I remember one of my professors, and I wish I could quote it. I need to look it up. But he had this sign on his office door, and it said something to the effect of, thank you for coming and discussing these deep and hard questions. We haven't really answered all the questions, but the answers we've come up with have opened up deeper and harder questions. And it just went down this whole list. So in other words, the more you learn, the more you know you need to learn. There is that dangerous place in there. You know, you've heard the old saying, a little learning is a dangerous thing. There's that dangerous place that a little learning can puff someone up. A lot of learning can puff someone up in pride. But the truth is, even with humility, even if a person pursues knowledge, if they're doing this thinking that they will eventually acquire happiness because they have greater understanding, it's just not going to happen. The result of greater learning is very often not what we expected. Don't you agree? I mean, you might think, what's the big deal here? But quite honestly, you and I are looking at a country, and we could go into Europe as well, who told itself that greater learning would solve our problems. Right? For the longest time, that's what we heard. We just need to educate. We need to enlighten. We need to help people understand. And so, should we educate? Absolutely. But did it solve all of our social ills? Did it change all of our injustices? No. We're just smarter at having at having problems or creating problems. In fact, studies have shown many times that it's not so much social ills disappear among a more educated populace. It's that the social ills that go on are just more complicated. Oftentimes in an area where there hasn't been a lot of learning, the people tend to be more physical. They will fight and kill and do things like that. The more educated they get, the more complicated their sins and crimes become. But they're still sins. They're still crimes. We really haven't solved anything. Why? Because we're sinners. And so very often greater learning does not give us the result that we expected. Man thinks that through greater knowledge and education, he will increase his personal happiness. But over and over, we see that this is also grasping at the wind. If we could could you imagine 20 years ago, 15 years ago, even maybe 10 years ago, people actually contemplating going to Mars and setting up a new civilization? You know, if you go back to the beginning of the modernization, mechanization time, the turn of the century, that was the whole idea. We build these machines. We could, the metropolis, we just build this and greater medicine, and we can get to the moon, and we create all this stuff that we'll do away with all disease and all poverty, all this kind of, and here we are over 100 years from that. Has anything really changed? And that's exactly what Solomon says in verse 15. Maybe you heard me read verse 15, and you thought, what is he talking about? Well, there it is. What is crooked cannot be made straight. You can't educate someone into the kingdom of God. A crooked, sinful heart is going to only do crooked, sinful things. We just become educated rebels. Honestly. Far from denying the grace of God, Ecclesiastes is actually pushing us to the edge. It's showing us that we're looking the wrong way. With all the great learning and wisdom, can you make a crooked thing straight? Let me say it this way. Can education and moralism correct the sinful heart of man? No. No. Some of the worst human beings in the history of this planet were the most educated. Check it out. So Solomon observes that it is an unhappy business. It's vanity. It's crooked. Cannot be made straight. It's incapable of effecting. What does it mean? It can't be made straight. In other words, it's wisdom and knowledge as good as it is. Okay, don't take this as an either or. This is an understanding. This is experiment, okay? And as good as it is, it's incapable of effecting real change. He applied his heart and mind to seek and to know, or to master, we might say, to seek and to know, to master, and he did it with dispassionate reason. Maybe you noticed he says, to know madness and folly. And a couple of times he says, and my wisdom remained with me. What's he talking about? Why would he study madness and folly? And what does he mean by, and my wisdom stayed with me? What he's saying is, he didn't just go into pleasure. Many times or knowledge, many times we preach this or teach it a little bit wrong. We make it sound like Solomon was just debased. He just backslid on God and just went into every one of these holes and just sinned and he did a lot of sinning. Okay, I'm not justifying, but I want us to understand that it wasn't blind. Solomon says, my wisdom stayed with me. And I went into knowledge with wisdom. In other words, like a scientist, like one who researches, he went into these issues, these pathways, and he was able to take them. Even though he was sinning, God still gave him the wisdom to hold them up and study them, and to give you and me a legitimate assessment of its value or lack of it. And that's what he's talking about. So he says, I studied not only wisdom and learning, but I also studied madness and folly. So in other words, he had a psychology degree. Just kidding. Just kidding. Just playing. But honestly, if we're going to have full knowledge, you do have to study it all. You know, you have to look at the negative, the positive, all those things. And that's what he did. He had dispassionate research. The pursuit proved to be fruitless because the increase of knowledge merely illuminates the problems of man. And this greater knowledge leads us to an increase in sorrow. We have a saying, don't we? Ignorance is what? Bliss. Solomon said it the other way. He turned it around and said, the increase of knowledge or understanding results in an increase of sorrow. You know, you could be buried in provincialism and, you know, get up every day and just do your little business and go back to bed and get your little business and maybe feel quite a bit of happiness. And until you pick up a history book or a philosophy book or even the Bible for that matter. Turn on the news, or if there was such a thing. And then you begin to realize maybe you're healthy. Maybe you're at peace. Maybe you have a nice little piece of property and you're enjoying your life. But over here are children who are homeless. Here's a nation that's at war. Here's a whole city that just got flooded with millions of gallons of water. We began to realize pain and suffering are everywhere. So the increase of knowledge, it didn't bring happiness. It brought sorrow. The more you know in a sinful world, the more you grieve. Now you know why Jesus said, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. See, God has opened our eyes. We look out into the world and we see the world like Christ. Sheep having no shepherd, as chicks without the hen, unprotected. And we have our Lord's heart for that. We grieve over the dying and the suffering throughout the world. So fruitless pursuit of knowledge is a good thing. And we see that who wrote Proverbs primarily? Solomon, for the most part. And what did Solomon tell us to do in the book of Proverbs? Search for wisdom. Dig for it like hidden treasure, like gold, precious jewels. And now we see him in Ecclesiastes saying, but I want to warn you, the deeper you go, the more sorrow you will bear. This means nothing, and it's related to nothing, but I don't know why. I'm just going to say it. I don't know if any of you have ever watched Jordan Peterson. I don't even know. I don't know if he's a Christian. I think Doug Wilson said he is not far from the kingdom of God. You know, so I don't know. I'm not sure. But I'll tell you one thing that strikes me about him. He's a philosopher, psychologist, psychiatrist, all those, these kind. And yet he weeps over the hurt and the destruction in this world more than a lot of preachers and Christians I know. Just go watch some of his videos. Shame on us. In fact, he has one video where he calls the Church of Christ out and says, what's wrong with you people? You have the knowledge. In fact, he even says, you have the answer. What's wrong with you? Whew, that's an indictment, isn't it? The fruitless pursuit of pleasure. We see that in verses 1 through 11. He says, I said in my heart, come now. He's talking to his own heart. I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. Live it up. But behold, this also was vanity. This also was fleeting, empty. Well, what kinds of pleasure did he experience? Well, verse 2, laughter. He says, laughter, it is mad. Now, understand, he's not talking in absolutes in all of these. He's not saying, don't ever laugh. Okay? Some days you just need a laugh. Amen? So that's not what he's saying. He's saying, if you're going to look for your life's meaning and purpose and happiness in these things, he says, laughing in the great scheme of things in a fallen world is madness. Man is in rebellion against God. He's condemned. He's under the wrath of God. Men and women are dying and going to hell every day. To live life as some kind of jokester is madness. It's to stick your head in the sand and watch while the whole world explodes around you. It's madness. That's what he means. Pleasure changes nothing. He says, and of pleasure, what use is it? What use is it? Have you ever been on a really good vacation? I remember one time, went on a vacation, came home, and under my office door was a resignation of a staff member. And I'm like, oh boy. You want to talk about ruining your vacation. I'm like, well, here we go. And it wasn't a nice one. It wasn't thank you and all that. It was a I'm mad, type situation. So what use is it? In the great scheme of things, yeah, we can have a great time at the beach or we can do this or that, but in the great scheme of things, what does it change? We still have sin. We still have sorrow. We still have death and pain, war, famine. He invested his time in accomplishments and art and architecture. He said, I made great works, built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks and planted them, all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forests and the trees. He did what all great rulers do. He created these great parks and gardens and manicured citadels and so forth, and he said it's worthless. There was nothing given in accomplishments and art and architecture that gave man that ultimate fulfillment. He fell for the trappings of wealth and luxury. He says, I bought male and female servants. Slaves were born in my house. I possessed herds and flocks and gold and silver and all of these things. He says, I looked to the music and sex. He says, I got singers and both men and women, many concubines and the delight of the sons of men. He had the live it up life. He could do that. He amassed power and pride from his efforts. He says, so I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me, and whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep it from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. Don't think that he went into this like the caricature of the hard, fuddy-duddy Puritan. Okay, that's a caricature. It's not real, okay? But we could say that, well, Solomon didn't enjoy those things because he was such a godly man. Solomon himself says in these verses, and I enjoyed them. I enjoyed them. And these were my rewards for all my works. But in the very next verse, he bursts that and says, then I considered all that my hands had done and the toil I had expended in doing it. And behold, all was vanity and striving after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. Those are back to back. He just said, I had all this pleasure, and this was the reward for my toil. And the very next verse, he says, it was worthless. Well, how do you interpret that? You interpret it this way, that he did enjoy those things. He had a measure, a time, where maybe it looked like it was going to be happy. It was going to provide what he wanted. But then ultimately, it didn't. And isn't that the way it is with, we might say alcohol or drugs or sex or money, power? I mean, let's don't make it all things that, that's, easy to say that's wrong. Everybody wants to live a nice life. Everybody wants to live, to have the nice things and go to the good places and all the great vacation spots and all those things. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with some of those things. There's no fulfillment in them ultimately. It's only temporary, isn't it? Only temporary. Do we really believe that? Because the way, I know most Americans, and I think it's big in the church too, the way we look at singers, actors, we want to be like them, don't we? Or some people do. We have TV shows, they don't have this anymore, but I'm telling my age, Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. Remember that one? Now you can go to the YouTube and just watch, Mansions of the Stars. I'm not saying that's a title. I have no idea. I'm just saying you can go there and see your favorite movie star's mansion. Whatever good that does. Or we could be like I saw recently where one fellow was talking about America's obsession with the royal family. I remember I got up the next morning when all this went on, and I looked at Lori and I said, well, we have a new king. No, America doesn't have a king, but we behave like we do. We followed Princess Diana and Kate and the boys and all that stuff like they're our royalty. Why? Because they fit in our mythological mindset. The things that we think we would like to live like that. I don't really think we would, but Solomon found that his search for answers to what brings mankind happiness in this cruel and harsh world lived out under the sun was successful as an experiment, but fruitless in its result. So he got the answers he wanted, but he didn't get the results he wanted. Can you see the search going on around you? It's a needless effort. It's already been done by someone who had the means, the position, and the understanding, and found to be fruitless. And lastly, the next one, fruitless pursuit of legacy. I'll move through this quickly. So I turn to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do who comes after the king? In other words, I sought to preserve my legacy. Every great ruler wants to, don't they? But then he says, it's already been done. He says, only what has already been done. You see that in verses 12 through 17. He says, I can't do anything new. It's already been done. He says, and it all ends the same for everyone. Then I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than in folly. Sounds good. As there is more gain in light than in darkness. The wise person has eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I perceive that the same event happens to all of them. And I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me. In other words, what point is your legacy? We're all going to die. And then eventually he says, we'll be forgotten. And I said in my heart that this also is vanity. For the wise of the fool there is no enduring remembrance. There is no enduring remembrance. When the great man and consort of Queen Elizabeth I, Prince Albert, saw his impending death, he made the Queen promise that she would not erect statues and great memorials in his honor. But the Queen's love and grief was so that after his passing, she ordered that several extraordinary memorials would be constructed in his honor. These remain standing to this very day, one of the wonders of that time. And yet, how many young people today even know who Prince Albert is? And yet he has some of the greatest monuments in London. Lastly, the fruitless pursuit of success. I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool. He's saying you will work yourself to an early grave for success, to an early death. Verse 22, what has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he has toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is full of vexation. Even in the night his heart does not rest. This, can't you just feel it, is vanity. He says you work for success and you'll kill yourself early. You will leave it all for another to inherit, he says. Yet he will be master of all, for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. So I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun, because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must have everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This also is vanity. And can't you feel him say it? And a great evil. Can't you feel the frustration? I did all this work. I collected this. I succeeded. I did all the work. And I'm going to die and leave it to somebody else. And they didn't work for it. And they don't appreciate it. And I never got to enjoy it. Now, don't get it. Remember, we studied work. He's not teaching us to be lazy. He's teaching us that not even work or the pursuit of success and achievement will grant us ultimate happiness. So how many great men died early, having expended their life and energy achieving only to leave everything to someone else? Is happiness to be found in success, achievement, winning, the thrill of change? Not really. Even the challenge? Not really. But even the best of these begin as headline, continue as an illustration, and end as a footnote before being forgotten altogether. So what's the conclusion? What's our takeaway? Is all of life worthless? Does it have no meaning? Can mankind not have happiness? The answer is found in verses 24 through 26. Look with me. Solomon's not pessimistic here. He's not leaving us hopeless. He's leaving us knowledge. There is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. Now, some will look at that and say, see, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. But you need to read the next verse, because that's not what he's saying. Look in the next verse. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For far apart from Him, I believe that's referring to God, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases Him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. And to the sinner He has given the business of gathering and collecting, only to give to one who pleases God. This also is vanity and striving after the wind. Jesus said it this way, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Solomon is saying, enjoy God and don't expect all of that in this life. Be content with what you have. And you know what? Those people who don't know God and chase all of these things and build their little kingdoms, you'll inherit every bit of it. God's people will inherit every bit of it, is what he's saying. Philip Ryken said it this way about Ecclesiastes: it shows us the weariness of our existence so that we will not expect to find meaning and satisfaction in earthly things, but only in God above. Money, sex, power, achievement, none of these things satisfy. Only God does. This does not mean, of course, that if we believe in God, we stop feeling the vanity of life under the sun. We do feel it, but Ecclesiastes shows us our need for above the sun perspective that brings joy and meaning to life. You see, like I said, Solomon is bringing us to the edge, to the cliff of all of our false hopes. And he's saying, see what that leads to? Now quit trusting in it. Quit pursuing that. That's all fruitless. Live your life like you are a fallen sinner saved by grace, and find your enjoyment in God alone. And one day we'll inherit the kingdom of God. So there is joy here. But it's Him and Him alone. Let's pray.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to our latest video. Go ahead and click that little thumb so you can like that video, as well as on the bottom right hand corner, click that little bell to subscribe and receive notifications. Thank you again so much for tuning in, supporting our video ministry here at Cognitive Church.